Purgatory is often misunderstood as a place of punishment. Many imagine it as a lesser hell, a place of anger, distance, or rejection. But Saint Faustina's spirituality reveals something very different. Purgatory is not a sign of God's rejection. It is a sign of God's mercy still at work. The soul in purgatory is already saved, already chosen, already loved, but not yet fully purified. This is where God's expectation becomes very specific and very tender. God does not expect the soul in purgatory to earn heaven. He expects the soul to allow itself to be purified. This is a profound difference. The soul is no longer in a place of decision. Its choice has already been made. It chose God. It belongs to God. But it still carries attachments, wounds, unfinished surrender, and traces of self that cannot enter the fullness of God's holiness. And because God is perfectly holy, He must also be perfectly gentle. Saint Faustina reveals that God's justice is not cold. It is medicinal. Purgatory is not about paying God back. It is about being healed so that the soul can receive God fully. What does God expect of the soul there? Not effort, not struggle, not proving worth. He expects surrender. The soul in purgatory can no longer act for itself. It can no longer merit. It can no longer choose. All it can do is consent. Consent to being purified. Consent to letting go. Consent to allowing God to finish what grace began on earth. This consent is not passive resignation. It is loving acceptance. The soul begins to see clearly what it could not fully see on earth, how much it still clung to small comforts, how much it still protected itself, how much it still loved itself alongside God. This realization is painful, not because God is angry, but because love now sees what love still lacks. Saint Faustina would say that the suffering of purgatory is not the suffering of fear. It is the suffering of longing, longing to be fully with God, longing to be completely pure, longing to have every obstacle removed. The soul in purgatory suffers not because God is far, but because God is so near. The nearness of God reveals what is not yet ready for His full presence, and God expects the soul to allow that nearness to purify, not to resist, not to cling, not to negotiate, but to trust the fire of mercy. The fire of purgatory is not the fire of hatred. It is the fire of love that burns away what love cannot keep. God expects the soul to let itself be loved into purity. This is difficult to imagine, because on earth we are used to fixing ourselves, improving ourselves, explaining ourselves, defending ourselves. In purgatory, none of that is possible. There is only truth. There is only light. There is only God, and God expects the soul to rest in that light, even when that light is painful. Painful not because it is cruel, but because it is honest. Saint Faustina reveals that God's expectation in purgatory is not suffering for its own sake. It is completion. Completion of surrender, completion of detachment, completion of purification, so that when the soul finally enters heaven, it can receive God without resistance, without fear, without anything left that would limit love. This is mercy to the end. Not mercy that excuses, but mercy that perfects. Not mercy that lowers holiness, but mercy that raises the soul to holiness. This is what God expects of a soul in purgatory, to allow love to finish its work. One of the most striking truths Saint Faustina reveals is that the soul in purgatory understands God differently than it did on earth. On earth, faith is mixed with doubt, hope is mixed with fear, love is mixed with self-protection. In purgatory, illusion is gone. The soul sees God clearly enough to long for Him intensely, but not yet clearly enough to be fully united to Him. This creates a unique suffering, the suffering of holy desire. The soul knows God is its home. The soul knows God is its fulfillment. And yet, the soul cannot yet enter fully. This is why the suffering of purgatory is not despair. It is delay. Delay of love. Delay of union. Delay of rest. And in this delay, God expects something very specific from the soul. Complete agreement with His purification. Not complaining, not resisting, not wishing for shortcuts. The soul in purgatory does not say, "This is unfair." It says, "This is necessary." This is one of the most beautiful and painful aspects of purgatory. The soul now loves God too much to want to bring anything impure into his presence. What once felt small on earth now feels heavy. Small resentments, half surrenders, hidden attachments, unfinished forgiveness, subtle pride. These are not mortal sins, but they are obstacles to perfect love. The soul in purgatory sees them clearly, and this clarity itself is part of the purification. Saint Faustina would say that God expects the soul to accept this clarity with humility. Humility that says, I see now. Humility that says, I understand why this must be burned away. Humility that says, I want nothing that separates me from you. This humility is not crushing, it is freeing. Because the soul no longer argues with God, it no longer defends itself, it no longer explains itself, it simply consents. Consent is the soul's final act of love. On earth, love is proven by action. In purgatory, love is proven by surrender. The soul cannot act, but it can agree. Agree to be purified, agree to let go, agree to allow God to complete his work. Saint Faustina reveals that this consent is not cold acceptance, it is burning longing. The soul does not want to escape purification, it wants to complete it, because the soul now sees that purification is the last barrier between itself and perfect union with God. This makes purgatory both painful and hopeful. Painful because love is delayed, hopeful because love is certain. The soul is no longer afraid of God's judgment, it is eager for God's embrace, and God, in his mercy, does not rush this process carelessly. He purifies carefully, he heals completely, he prepares thoroughly, because heaven is not just a place, it is a state of total love, and God expects the soul to be fully capable of that love. This is why purgatory exists, not as a punishment chamber, but as a preparation room, a place where love is made whole. And God's expectation is simple, though not easy. Let me finish. One of the most merciful dimensions of God's plan for souls in purgatory is that they are not purified alone. Saint Faustina reveals a deep mystery. God allows the love of the living to participate in the purification of the dead. This is not because God needs help, it is because love always desires to involve love. The soul in purgatory cannot merit for itself. It cannot offer new acts of love, sacrifice, or prayer to hasten its purification. Its state is fixed, its choice has been made. But God, in his mercy, allows the Church on earth to assist, through prayer, through masses offered, through sacrifices united to Christ, through acts of mercy offered for the dead. This reveals something very important about what God expects. He expects the soul in purgatory to receive help with humility, not to refuse it, not to be proud, not to insist on doing it alone. This humility is part of purification. On earth, many souls struggled to receive help. They wanted to be strong, independent, self-sufficient. In purgatory, that illusion is gone. The soul now understands that it is saved not by its own strength, but entirely by mercy, and so it allows itself to be helped. This is deeply healing, because it completes the lesson of dependence. Saint Faustina would say that God allows this cooperation so that love can cross the boundary between earth and eternity. The living learn compassion, the suffering learn humility, the Church becomes truly one. This also reveals something tender about God's heart. He does not isolate souls in purification. He surrounds them with love, not only his love, but our love. This does not replace purification, it supports it. God still purifies, but he allows prayers to lighten, console, and hasten the soul's journey. This is why God expects something very specific from the soul in purgatory regarding this help. Gratitude, trust, receptivity. The soul no longer sees itself as deserving or undeserving. It simply receives. This receiving is itself a final lesson. On earth, many souls struggled to receive love. They believed they had to earn everything. In purgatory, the soul learns that everything is gift, gift of salvation, gift of purification, gift of prayers, gift of mercy. Saint Faustina reveals that God is forming in the soul a final poverty of spirit, not the poverty of lacking God, but the poverty of depending entirely on him, and depending also on the love of others. This completes the purification of pride. The soul no longer says, "I can handle this," it says, "I receive." This is beautiful, because heaven is not a place for independent souls. It is a place for souls who live entirely from love. God expects the soul in purgatory to become completely receptive, receptive to mercy, receptive to help, receptive to grace. This receptivity prepares the soul for heaven, where everything is received and nothing is claimed. Saint Faustina would say that every prayer offered for the dead is not only a help to them, it is a lesson for us, a lesson that love continues, a lesson that mercy connects, a lesson that no soul is ever alone in God's plan. And this is what God expects, that purification becomes not a solitary suffering, but a shared movement of love. One of the most powerful instruments God uses to purify the soul in purgatory is not external punishment, but interior desire. Saint Faustina reveals that the soul in purgatory desires God with a clarity it never had on earth. On earth, desire was mixed with distraction, fear, fatigue, and divided love. In purgatory, desire is pure. The soul knows with certainty God is its life, God is its home, God is its fulfillment. And because of this certainty, the inability to fully possess God becomes a deep suffering. Not the suffering of terror, but the suffering of love delayed. This desire itself becomes fire, a fire that does not destroy the soul, a fire that purifies it. The soul no longer clings to sin, but it may still cling to self, subtle preferences, old ways of seeing itself, residual attachments to comfort, recognition, or control. These cannot survive in the presence of perfect desire. Desire for God burns away lesser desires. The soul no longer wants compromise, it wants fullness, and this wanting becomes painful because it is not yet fulfilled. Saint Faustina would say that God uses this holy longing as one of the deepest purifying forces, not because he withholds himself cruelly, but because he is enlarging the soul's capacity to receive him. Capacity is formed through stretching. The soul is stretched by love. Every moment of delay increases hunger. Every increase in hunger expands the heart. This is why God expects the soul to remain open to desire, not to numb it, not to resist it, not to try to lessen it, but to allow it. This is difficult, because desire hurts, but desire also heals. It heals divided love. It heals lukewarm affection. It heals half-surrender. The soul in purgatory learns to want God with no conditions. Not God plus something else. Not God when it is comfortable. Not God when it is safe. Only God. This is total purification of the will. The will becomes single. The heart becomes unified. Love becomes undivided. Saint Faustina would say that this is one of the greatest gifts God gives the soul in purgatory, a heart that finally wants only Him. And God expects the soul to allow this desire to do its work, not to escape it, but to let it complete the purification, because heaven is not only seeing God, it is wanting nothing else, and God uses desire to teach the soul that lesson fully. Another deep expectation God has of the soul in purgatory is the final purification of self-love. On earth, even sincere love of God was often mixed with self-interest. The soul wanted God, but also wanted comfort, wanted heaven, but also wanted control, wanted holiness, but also wanted recognition. In purgatory, these mixtures become visible, not to shame, but to heal. The soul sees clearly how often love of self quietly shaped choices, not in big sins, but in small preferences. Preference to be understood, preference to be right, preference to be seen as good, preference to protect emotional comfort. These are not evil, but they are not heaven. Heaven is pure gift, pure reception, pure love without reference to self. Saint Faustina would say that God expects the soul in purgatory to let go of the last traces of self-centeredness. This is painful, because identity on earth was partly built on self. In purgatory, identity becomes built only on God. The soul learns to say without reserve, "You are enough. I need nothing else. I want nothing but you." This is the death of spiritual self-interest, not death of personality, but death of self as center. God becomes the center. This final purification is gentle and radical. The soul no longer measures love by how it feels, no longer measures worth by what it did, no longer measures identity by how it was seen. It rests in being loved. Saint Faustina would say, this is one of the most beautiful fruits of purgatory. The soul becomes simple, no arguments, no explanations, no defenses, only truth, only God. And God expects the soul to allow this simplification, to become little again, not little in suffering, but little in self. This prepares the soul for heaven, where all eyes are on God and no one needs to look at themselves. In the end, what God expects of a soul in purgatory is not effort, it is openness, not achievement, but consent, not fear, but trust. Saint Faustina reveals that purgatory is the final school of love, a school where God teaches the soul to love without resistance, to desire without division, to receive without pride, to belong without fear. God does not expect the soul to climb to heaven from purgatory. He expects the soul to allow itself to be carried by mercy, carried by purification, carried by love. The soul's final task is not to prove anything. It is to let go of everything that is not God. This is why purgatory exists, not because God is severe, but because God is thorough. He does not want partial union. He wants complete union. He does not want a divided heart. He wants a whole heart. He does not want a soul that still clings. He wants a soul that is free. Saint Faustina would say that God's expectation in purgatory is the same as his deepest desire on earth, that the soul becomes fully his, without fear, without defense, without condition. If you understand this, purgatory no longer looks like rejection. It looks like mercy completed, mercy that refuses to leave anything unfinished, mercy that heals to the root, mercy that prepares the soul for endless joy. This is what God expects of a soul in purgatory, to allow love to finish. And when love finishes, heaven begins.